when you come from very little, you have very little to protect. And so when you have little to protect, you protect it with everything.
Right.
This guy, he is either on drugs or homeless or maybe both. I don't really know. Shoot some words off and he dropped the N-word. In my mind, I heard him say this and I had to just get kind of clarification. Like, is this really, did I hear what I thought I heard? I'm pushing my daughter in the stroller and I'm like, okay. So now I have to think about how am I going to protect the people that I'm with in this situation? And I have to remove limits because the fact that you're coming across the street tells me you don't have any.
The following podcast is a Frederick Films production, sponsored by the American Licorice Company.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Embracing the Journey podcast, hosted by me. And if you guys haven't noticed, we got some decor. So the good people over at the American Licorice Company gave us a cool decal and some pictures to hang up, just to kind of give the room a little bit of jazz. All right, without further ado, I want to introduce somebody who comes from a series of background, whether it's singing, sports, just a plethora of things. But one thing that I really did want to focus on is what it's like to raise interracial babies in America this day and age. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my buddy, Broderick Hutchinson. How are you, my man? How you living?
I'm doing good, man. Appreciate you inviting me to jump on the podcast and talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, no doubt. So for those who don't know you, who are you? What do you do? Where'd you come from? Give us like a backstory.
Yeah, so I think short story, I was born in Illinois, Joliet, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. Kind of grew up between there and Wisconsin. Went to high school, college in Wisconsin, and then migrated out to Seattle back in 2009.
What brought you out this way?
Originally, I was looking at doing a master's degree in psychology at UW. So when I was looking at schools, they had the top program at the time, and I'm pretty competitive, so I figured, well, if I'm going to do it, I want to go to the top school. And I ended up missing some of the application deadlines for grad school, so typically it's like every quarter you have to apply. So rather than just going back home, I decided to stay out here and just kind of figure it out. So bounced around through some different jobs, did some personal training, did some massage therapy, coached at some high schools, worked at a couple of retail slots, and then just really realized that it wasn't really consistent. So I was trying to spend this time figuring out what it was that I actually wanted to do. So I transitioned from personal training into residential real estate, leased some apartments out in Chicago, and then moved to Seattle, did the same thing, and then transferred from that into commercial real estate with CBRE. And then from there, moved into Amazon, still in the real estate side, but now that's what I'm doing. So essentially, it's industrial business development for Amazon.
Right. Okay. So, and I know this has been a sensitive topic in America. It's been more apparent as of the past few years. Mm. But have you felt any racial inequalities while being at any of the jobs that you've been on, or being in any of the places, like the environments that you've had to work?
Yeah, actually. I think my way of kind of figuring out if what it is actually what it is to have people that I've built relationships with to watch, to verify if what I'm feeling is actually happening. So that happened once at a gym that I was working at in Chicago, and weirdly enough, I wasn't the only person of color on the roster. I was a fitness manager at the time. I had 33 trainers that I was responsible for. And I was putting out enough production that the interactions that I had with my regional manager probably should never have happened. But I think there are some underlying issues there that rather than just coming into the office and talking to me one-on-one about it, it was kind of blasted in front of staff and guests and all that. And so that was a situation where it led me to not be professional, so much to the point where I took my badge off, said we can go outside, inside, whatever it is.
What was the cause of it?
So essentially what happened is at the end of the month, what we would do is we would try to push for, protein products, basically anything related to training. So more training, more supplements, proteins, that type of thing. And so, I spent like 11 hours in the gym. I'm in there from 9 to 8, typically 6 days a week. And I took my lunch break like I always do. The gym was empty. I just went in the gym and started putting some shots up. And during that time, we started to get the gym ready for month end. And so I remember coming out of the gym, and my regional manager said something to me that I didn't really take serious initially. I just figured maybe he was stressed out trying to get the gym ready or whatever. But at the same time, there's nobody in the gym. There's no guests. It's the middle of the day. But I think even more important than that is that there's no reason for me to let you know what I'm going to do during my hour break. Right. That's just a time for me to separate from work. So I remember he said to me that they were trying to get ready for month end, and I was in the gym playing basketball. And the way he said it, the tone that he used made it seem like I was doing something wrong when, every day I'd done something similar to that. I would workout, I would leave the gym, whatever it was.
Because it's your break.
Right. So I kind of, after that specific incident, that's when I moved more into a defensive mode. And this was happening in front of guests and in front of colleagues. And so my colleagues are asking me, man, why is he talking to you like that? And I'm like, your guess is as good as mine. So the fact that it was being revealed by people that I worked with made it worse. So, I kind of went to a place where I was like, okay, listen, regardless of what's happening, before anything that I'm doing in this gym, I'm a man first. So you can talk to me like a man, or we can deal with it like men. But there's only two options. Mm-hmm. So that is around the time where I started to take my badge off, and I think the energy changed because it takes a lot to get me there. There's people that I know that it doesn't take that much, but I think my demeanor is such that I try to stay in the same calm state until I'm elevated to something, and that was a situation where I was elevated. And this guy specifically was from Poland. So maybe it was just, interaction in terms of how they communicate, but it wasn't something, one, that I thought was effective, two, that I thought was needed, and three, that I thought was handled in the way it should have been.
Right. I've heard, and somebody actually put a title to it. And obviously, we share the same color skin, and we may have, similar situations and things that we've all felt. And they told me something about at least once a day, someone's going to test your black card or your blackness. Mm-hmm. And depending on how you go about it is going to dictate your outcome. Mm-hmm. What's your stance on that?
I think that's accurate. And this is probably where the meat of this conversation will come from. Because I think being a black male, there are certain stigmas that we either have been labeled with or have to uphold based on how we were brought up. So how we react or respond to a specific situation is going to determine what happens to us. So that could either be we get stopped by a cop because we're going too fast on the highway. Mm-hmm. We stop at a gas station that's in an unincorporated city. We, tend to speak out of turn or elevate when we're not heard. And that can always be misconstrued as aggression. When in reality, when you come from very little, you have very little to protect. And so when you have little to protect, you protect it with everything.
Right.
And I think for me, that's essentially where that comes from. And I've been in situations where I've had people drop the N-word to me. I don't know if it was because that's how they were raised or because they were trying to figure out how to respond to it. And of the 3 times in my life that it's happened, I've responded twice. And the one time, which I'm sure we'll get into, that I didn't respond probably was the best time not to respond, but that one haunts me more than the times that I did respond.
Right. Man, that's interesting because I feel like people say things. So just being frank, I just flew in from Atlanta. I got home yesterday. I'm sitting in the airport. It's about 6 a.m. Atlanta time, so 3 a.m. our time. And this lady sends me a message on Instagram. I didn't think anything of it. And she asked me if I wanted to hang out. And I told her, I said, no, I'm okay. True story. And she called me the N-word because I didn't want to hang out. And it's like, hang out, right? Like, and she called me the N-word and told me that it was okay because she has an interracial baby. So this is a white woman saying that it was okay for her to call me the N-word because she has an interracial baby. And the headspace that kind of put me in, it threw me through a loop, man, where I could respond with anger and rage on which I wanted to. But I feel like in 2022, if someone says something like that, that's the expectation, is that you're going to meet them where they're at. And although that haunted me the entire flight, like why I should have said this or I should have did this, I kept having to tell myself that has nothing to do with me. And this is like daily occurrences that we, as African-American male and female, I'm sure, have to go through every single day that people don't see.
Yeah.
And it's complicated, right? It's complicated because at the end of the day, like you just want to be treated with respect.
Yeah.
So I couldn't imagine what it would be like being micromanaged on your lunch break and then being brought up as if you should feel bad or guilty for taking a lunch break.
Yeah.
Are you still experiencing like racial tension going on about your every single day, like your everyday life? Is that still potent in your life?
Yeah, I think it's certainly in a microaggression perspective, and it comes out typically in conversation. So, one thing that's unique to me is that I am African American male working in the largest tech company in the world doing real estate, it just doesn't make sense. Because to have visibility to real estate for me growing up was not a thing. So I didn't know what real estate consisted of. And it's a lot of things that go into it. Retail, the house you lived in, the place you rented, whatever it is, all that, it goes into that. And so I hear it mostly when people have conversations with me and they don't expect me to be as well put together as I am. Being able to answer questions or being able to articulate my thoughts or whatever it is. So my question always is, what did you expect? And I haven't been able to find the answer to that. So to me, that's considered a microaggression. I didn't know you knew so much. I didn't know you were so versed in this. Why not? What would you have assumed that I was? And so I kind of find myself really in more competition with me than I am in competition with trying to fit into what people think it should look like. And I say that because at this point in time, it's just a matter of, is this something I should engage in? Like, should I just give you a little bit and just leave it there? Is that a bigger dig on the microaggression you just gave me? Or is it more important for me to make you feel as though you were trying to make me feel in a way that's completely professional? So I think that part just took some practice for me. But again, I'm in a space that by definition and stat I'm not supposed to be in. So, it's just different from there.
As a kid, did you grow up with both parents in the household? No. Also, as a kid, did you see what you could be? Like, were you shown other Black people that looked like you, talked like you, came from your area? Were you shown their successes on where you could be in life? Or was it, no?
No.
In high school, grade school, whatever the situation may be, were you the majority or the minority?
Minority for sure.
Because I feel like a lot of people, a lot of kids these days are up against things that they have no idea that's going to be in their space for the rest of their life. And I think with social media, it actually gives false perspective and perception as as to who you are and who you can be based on this app that gives you access to everybody. Yeah. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
Different.
Weird.
Shh. Quiet.
Mighty. Unstoppable.
Incredible.
What makes you different makes you great.
Embrace your punch.
Yeah, so as I was saying, it's weird for me to associate where I was as a kid to where I am now. Mm-hmm. Because just like you come from a background where you don't see people like you make it out.
Right.
So you may be one of few that have made it out of that environment, and you made it out being raised by a single parent. Mm-hmm. And you're not the only one. You have sisters, right?
Yeah.
And where do you fall in that totem pole as age?
Third oldest.
Third oldest.
Yeah.
You got two people ahead of you, right? Are they out of the stigma or the stereotypes that we were supposed to be in? Or are they fitting some of those stereotypes?
Well, I think when I look on where we sit, the one thing that's consistent is that we've all been in a position of aid. And so when I say in a position of aid, I'm thinking where we have to care for someone. So my mom's a nurse. My older sister runs a daycare. My oldest brother is a mental health counselor, all in positions to aid people.
Right.
So, my sister runs a daycare, but the translation to that in today's world is that she runs a business.
Correct.
My brother has been a mental health counselor at the same place going on 9 years. And so he's been in a position of earning trust and building relationship and such. And so there's a lot of counsel that I think comes from that.
He's also seeing the world from a different perspective if he's dealing with mental health every day.
For sure. Because he's looking at it, there's no filter. Right. So when someone comes in, they're just coming in. They could be male, female, white, black, brown, Hispanic, Asian, whatever, and they're dealing with this issue. So the whole point is to help get through the issue. And so going back to what you mentioned about having access to things, my dad growing up, and he'll be honest about this, was an alcoholic, was addicted. So watching him and even my mom at some point, that was what I saw. So it didn't necessarily mean that this is what I have to be. I just didn't have access to other stuff. And so I think for us, when we get into sports and we get some, I don't want to call it praise, but we get some recognition for being better or faster or stronger, mm-hmm. then we kind of run with that power, and that power moves into different things. And then we get this label of, okay, this person is above the rest.
Right.
So that's when the recruiting starts, and that's when the visits start and things like that. And then there's this stigma of, this is my way to make it out, and this is my way to build mama house or get us out the hood or whatever it is. But I think that removes emphasis on the things that may not be sports related. So to be able to sit in a room full of cameras doing a podcast was probably not something that you thought would happen, and look at the impact that it's having on people. So when I talk to people about real estate, most people that hear real estate for the first time think that they have to sell something. So I either need to sell houses or I need to lease apartments or whatever. But if you think about any retail store that you walk into, that is considered some fashion of commercial real estate. So it's either office, it's retail, it's industrial. So if you walk into a Costco or Sam's Club, that's industrial real estate. If you walk into your house that you own or rent, that's residential real estate. If you walk into an Apple store to get a new phone, that's retail, that's real estate. If you walk into a grocery store, that's retail, that's real estate. And so not everybody in there is selling anything. There's cashiers in there. There's people that are just making sure that you can find what you're looking for. There's people that actually put up product in a planogram perspective so that when you walk in, it catches the eye. That's marketing. That's a part of real estate. So there's things that if you don't really understand it, then you're like, there, and I don't want to sell anything because I'm not good at selling. But if you're a project manager, a program manager, a product manager, a marketing major, or interior design, all those things have to deal with real estate. So I think for me, being able to see the expansive options between real estate or within real estate has been good, because while I was also heavily recruited out of high school, the visibility that I would have needed to get in order to make a choice that created an athletic professional background for me didn't happen. So there was nobody that took me on college visits. There was nobody that put together highlight tape for me. There was nobody that talked to me about how to figure out where best to fit in and why you should take this route and what the education looks like in addition to the sports. That didn't happen for me. So I'm able to be a mentor for people younger than me that in their mind, sports is the way out. Typically in the inner city, sports is the way out. So whatever sport that you do, if you're ahead of the rest, this is my way to get out. But it just doesn't have to be like that. And it took me a while to learn that it didn't have to be like that. I could still be as active. I could still be as disciplined. I could still, make sure that I'm hitting on my X's and O's, and I could build something that lasted longer than a season.
Let's jump a little bit ahead. So I know that you got kids and you're married,
Mm-hmm.
And she's not of the same race, right?
Right.
What does that look like before you guys had kids? What does that look like when you and her go on a date, or when you and her are out at the grocery store or whatnot? I know that's super vague, but I do want to hear what that means to you.
Yeah, I think before kids, it was just a black guy and a white girl, or a black guy and a Mexican girl, or whatever the interrace is. And so while I got looks before, I didn't really care to address it. It's very rare that someone will say something to you, but typically if it is, it's out of bitterness. So like, why is this black guy with this? Why are the white girls, or why the Mexican girls taking all our men, or whatever it is? That's typically where that comes from. But I think when kids came in the mix, there's a different protection level that you put onto that. And I didn't understand it. I remember my mom was always extremely protective, like ready to fight, protective over us. And I never really understood it until I had my own. And, if my daughter comes home from school and she's crying because she had a bad day because somebody bumped into her, then my first thought is to go up to the school.
Yeah.
She's in preschool. So you just get this level of protection. It's like, if it doesn't get addressed, then it can lead to things that create traumas in her adulthood that are starting right now. So when I look at it now, and I've had a situation that I was put in, again, like I said, I think we can touch on what I was put in, where it put me in a level of ultimate protection. And I had to think, if you think about the Equalizer movie and Denzel Washington going through, this is going to take me X amount of seconds, I have to do this and this and this and this. That was how I felt in this specific instance. And we were taking a walk in North Seattle. And it was the four of us. I have two little girls, and my youngest was still in a harness at this time, not walking, not anything. And, the homeless population in Seattle is pretty elevated right now, depending on where you are. And so you just kind of get the radar up. You see something, I don't really feel like dealing with that. So let's cross the street. Let's just cross the street. We continue going the same way. So in this specific instance, this guy, he is either on drugs or homeless, or maybe both. I don't really know. But we're walking north towards Green Lake-ish, and I hear him, shoot some words off, and he dropped the N-word. So in my mind, I heard him say this, and I had to just get kind of clarification, like, is this really Did I hear what I thought I heard? Okay. So I'm like, okay, let's just keep walking. And in my ear, she's saying, please just keep walking. Don't respond. Just keep walking. So I'm like, okay. So the second time, he starts to advance across the street and he shoots it off again. And so I'm pushing my daughter in the stroller and I'm like, okay, at this point, now I got to stop. Because one, you said it twice. So you were in your right mind enough to use that language in that instance. And now you're advancing and that makes it worse. So now I have to think about how am I going to protect the people that I'm with in this situation? And I have to remove limits because the fact that you're coming across the street tells me you don't have any. So he's shooting off things. And at this point in time, I really had no idea what he said because I only heard the M word twice and I was already ready to go wherever I needed to go.
Yeah.
So I'm looking around. I'm like, it's got to be a brick or a stick or something that I can pick up. And I think the most dangerous part about that situation is there was no off switch for me. So I was prepared to kill. I was prepared to not stop until he stopped fully. And I wasn't afraid about it. That was the most crazy part about it. Having been in a situation before, I knew I could have an off switch. Let me just address this, throw a couple punches, and then I'm good. But in this instance, it wasn't that. And I think the toughest part was that here I am with two interracial kids, white wife, white male, shooting these words off to me. And I'm just in this whirlwind of like, how humiliating is this to be the odd man out? And want to react.
What do you mean by that, the odd man out?
Well, I think if it were me and my brothers, or me and my sisters even, and this happened, they feel how I feel.
Yeah.
So they're being called this too.
Correct.
And now we converge on the situation. And everybody has a fight or flight, and how you respond to it is just dependent upon what that situation is. But in this specific instance, it wasn't a need to join the fight. There was a need for me to protect the nest, basically. And so I hear crying in this ear. One of my daughters asleep. The other one has no idea what's happening. And this guy is probably the distance that you are from me right now.
Yeah.
So in my head, I'm like, I could just handle this situation. But I'm also like, but I need to just get them home. So I said, okay, listen, the best thing you can do is just walk back across the street. And he kept chirping, and I'm like, I promise, just walk across the street. So he ended up turning around and taking off, and we ended up walking back home. And that whole time, I just found myself angry because while I know that I made the right choice, the choice that I wanted to make, I didn't make.
Right.
And so I found myself like, you didn't do anything. Like, you did the right thing, but you didn't do anything.
Right.
And I think that's the battle that I've been sitting in, because as I mentioned before, of the 3 times that this has happened, this is the one time I didn't react. And so while it probably was the best time I didn't react, I wanted to, even though I know I shouldn't. So that's the tug of war battle that my mind stayed in.
Let me ask you this. What conversation did you have to have with your wife about how you were feeling when you got home? And did she understand?
Yeah, I think the conversation, honestly, is probably a continuous one, because that happened probably over a year ago, over 2 years ago now. So it shouldn't still affect me, but it does. And when I think about that, I had to equate it to childhood traumas, because in my childhood, this also happened. And I responded then. So I'm looking at this pattern of like, you responded and you didn't respond. And there's a battle there. But that's what I mentioned. There's a level of, I don't know if humiliation is the word or not, But in that instance, if you looked at my daughters, they're light skinned. You wouldn't be able to tell what race they are. You just know that they're light skinned.
Yeah.
And so, of course, in African American culture, you can have a lot of different shades of skin and not be mixed at all.
Right.
And so you just wouldn't know. And so in this instance, I'm thinking, okay, this guy, he can pretend to be out of his mind, but he was in his mind enough to use the words that he used in that specific space.
And using them for harm.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe it was, let me pull the card and see which one I get.
Yep.
And I think the card that he pulled was the right one on the wrong day.
Right.
Had it been the right one on the right day, I was prepared to, potentially have the police knock at my door and say, hey, we got video of you, doing what you did to this guy, and we got to take you in. Like, and I think when you look at it from that perspective, when we talked about what motto you had growing up, that was the motto I had. Both my mom and my dad have spent time behind bars. So to me, while I've never been behind bars, I was comfortable enough in that moment to not be bothered by it.
To risk it all.
And I think that was where I probably spend the most time now convincing myself that the choice was right. Because being in this space, again, is a rarity in itself. So to be able to be in that situation and make what I felt was the right choice and the wrong choice for combative reasons has just been a growth area for me.
I feel that. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
Are you in need of digital content for your business? Family portraits for the holidays? Videos and photos for your social media? Frederick Films provides a plethora of digital marketing services that can push your brand or business forward. Visit frederickfilms.com to learn more.
So, as a husband and as a father, and I hate to say in an interracial relationship, but I think people need to understand what that actually means. What are some of the fears that you have, not only for your wife, but your kids growing up, especially in this day and age?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is, will they fall into an issue where they're conforming to what people think they should be? So with them being interracial, why do you always hang out with white people? Why do you always hang out with black people? But to them, they have relatives that are both colors. So for them, there is no difference. They see that there's a different color right now. They're too young to know much other than that. But I think what I try to really instill in them is to keep the personality, because even myself, having dealt with copycat syndrome, I guess you could call it, and just trying to fit into what was believed to be right for me. So you're a really good football player, so you should play football. You're really fast, so you should run track. You jump really high, so you should play basketball. And then I'd ask myself, do I want to do that? Maybe I don't want to do sports at all. Maybe I just don't want to do it after high school. Like, and I think you get into that where, okay, this is what people want me to do, and I'm pretty decent at it, so let me just do it. But I think for them, one, recognizing, hey, I think the biggest thing is to recognize that you have to know when to be yourself, when to command respect, when to deliver respect, and ultimately who's in your corner. So there are situations that they'll probably run into because they're interracial that they didn't expect, that probably won't happen. I mean, I would hope it doesn't happen until high school, but in today's day and age, parents are teaching their kids all type of things. So I think just being able to remain the protector of them in those situations, but to give them the tools that would equip them to handle it themselves. So I think, just looking at them being interracial is going to be an issue in itself, as it relates to what do they check on a job application? What do they?
Yeah, you never. There's no box for that, is there?
There is no box for that. So I think what we know from someone looking at them is they'll never be able to check white.
Right.
So what do I check? You know? So I think just being able to again, equip them for what could be to come. Having had my own situations, or maybe one day if they happen to run into it, that I could share with them some of my situations and how I reacted to them, and then ultimately give them the opportunity to make whatever choice suits them.
Has it been difficult having a wife that doesn't share the same difficulties that you may face as a black man? And I guess what I mean by that, I'm going to give you a scenario. Say you and your wife are at a restaurant. Your wife's had a terrible day. She starts crying at the table. You're sitting across from her. You're engaging in a conversation. A random person walks up. What do they see first? A, you consoling your wife. B, them saying, hey, is everything okay? Or C, what did this black man do to this white woman?
Well, I definitely don't think it's A. What I do think is it's probably a combination of B or C, and one is going to be elevated over the other based on what they see initially.
Yeah.
I think the biggest part of that is probably if there doesn't seem to be a threat, then it doesn't really matter what's happening. But I think to the original point you mentioned, the fact of the matter is I'll never know what it's like to be white, and
Sure.
she'll never know what it's like to be black. So I think in instances like the one I mentioned, that was unprovoked. So typically we will get put in a situation where we're provoked to respond. So somebody says something in the store and somebody's filming it, and I'll say it again so I could get it on camera. But this was a completely unprovoked situation. And ultimately, if I get stopped by a cop now, I don't know if I'll get home or not.
Right.
With so many things that have happened between 2019 and now, the George Floyd incident was a very big one amongst so many others, but I'd seen it so often that it was like, okay, initially it was like, wow, I'm glad that wasn't me. But then that thing shifted to like, that could have been me, and it could be me, and nothing was happening. So I think that hit me differently, and I had to talk about that because I don't put myself in situations where somebody could mistake my cell phone for a weapon.
Right.
I don't wear my hoodie up if it's 8 o'clock at night in a grocery store.
But these are all things that you know,
Mm-hmm.
right? These may not be things that people that have never had to face this, that they would know.
Right.
So your past experiences have led you to completely alter your way of life to make other people around you feel safer. Have
Yeah.
you noticed that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Walk me through that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the objective that we've been taught is not to be perceived as a threat.
Right.
So, back then, if we got stopped by a cop, my mom would say, yes, sir, no, sir. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. Because we felt that showing that level of respect decreased the danger that could happen. And now we've seen evidence that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you say. So now putting myself in a situation where I'm like, nah, I'm not even going to go do that because I don't know what's going to happen. So I think there is some teaching in that because you deal with traumas in childhood that affects you as an adult. And you don't really realize what those traumas are until there's something that reminds you of that trauma. So if you saw someone get unlawfully detained, as I've been before, or if you saw someone be stopped. So real scenario, I went to college in Wisconsin at Concordia University in a city called Mequon, Wisconsin, which is, I'd say, probably most comparable to like a Redmond, Kirkland. Okay. There's just not a lot of us there, and if they are, it's because there's wealth. And so I lived in off-campus housing, and so after football practice, a couple of my other teammates lived close to me, and they didn't have cars. I'm like, okay, I'll just drop you off. I'm going the same direction I'm going in. And so I pulled up to a stop sign, complete stop, not a rolling stop, didn't miss anything. Went through the stop sign, and not even 10 seconds later, I heard the siren show up. And I'm like, well, it wasn't a stoplight. My plates are valid. I don't have any tint on my windows.
Everything
not
checked
speeding.
out?
There's nothing in my trunk. Like, I don't know. All right, well, let me just stop and see. So cop got out, he came up to my door, and the first thing he said was, what are you doing in this neighborhood?
And are you by yourself at this point?
I got teammates in the car with me.
White, black, Mexican?
One white, two black.
Okay.
And, at that time it was different. So I'm like, well, I live in this neighborhood. What are you doing in this neighborhood? Now, if I would have said that now, who knows what would have happened. But in that specific instance, there was no wrong that happened. So he's like, let me grab your ID and let me grab everybody else's ID in the car. So understanding a little bit more about what this looked like, I knew that they didn't have to give their IDs up because I'm driving. It's my car, it's my registration, my insurance, it's everything. My car. So I look back and I'm like, no, you guys can keep that in your pocket. You don't need to give that. He asked for mine because I'm driving. So here it is. You can check it. There's no speeding tickets. I've never got a speeding ticket. There's no warrants. There's no parking tickets. There's no nothing. But while we're here, let me just grab your badge number because I don't think there's any reason to be stopped and to question me in that manner. So got the badge number, and that all turned into, make sure you drive safe. In my mind, I'm like, I've been driving safe. I don't know. I don't even know where that's coming from. And so there was an instance where we pulled off and everybody's talking about it. I'm maybe 20 or 21 at the time. And it's kind of laughed off. Like, well, that was stupid. Why did the cop just stop us for no reason? But when you look back on it, if you can ask me, what am I doing in the neighborhood and can't produce something that I did illegally, then that to me is direct stereotype.
You're looking
for something. So you don't have a reason to search my car. I didn't give you a reason to stop me. And when I'm asking you what the reason was, you don't have one. So I asked him, why did we get stopped? And he just went on to the next point. So that's kind of when I was like, yeah, this is not the right place for me.
Right.
I mean,
but that could have happened anywhere.
It could have happened anywhere. Yeah. And I think I think when you look at how frequently it happens and how often we are directed to be the bigger person, make the bigger choice, don't let someone win. I don't think it's about allowing someone to win or lose. I think it's about not putting myself in a position where it is a competition I didn't ask for. So I've done sports in the past, and I know when to be competitive. But me not responding in a way that was pertinent to what would have been considered safe kind of defeats the whole purpose.
Right.
So I need you to know that this was wrong, especially if you can't tell me what the wrong was.
Right. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
Looking to start a podcast, live stream, make a presentation, or perform on stage? Samson has all the gear you need to help you become a successful content creator. To learn more, visit samsontech.com.
So I got a question for you. I don't know if you're going to be ready for this because it's not a common question that we would be asked. So just hear me out. Do you find between black and white, black people, white people, that one group is more racist towards you than the other? Considering your entire situation about having a white wife, interracial kids, and so on and so forth, what group gives you the most grief about who you are today as a man, white or black?
I don't know. I mean, I think, if I'm being honest, I think it's probably 50-50. Because of the microaggressions.
Right.
You know, I think I find myself, and my mom was really good about just making sure that everybody was respected as long as that's what they garnered. And so I feel like you can kind of feel it sometimes. There's some things that you can feel that don't need to be said that you can decipher, like, I know what that was.
Yeah.
And so now I'm at a place where either I'm going to call it out or I won't. Because, you know, if I look at my own circle, the people that I talk to, the people that I'm closest to, the people that I can call in a need and they'll answer, have my phone number. And if you don't, you're not within that circle. And so when I've looked back on when this happened in high school and how I felt about friends saying, oh, not that one, this one, and, you know, just kind of trying to direct traffic for me, either because they didn't like the girl I was with or they didn't get along with their circle or this person was too white or that person was too hood or like whatever. Again, I dealt with that on what I would consider high level at that time. And so now when I'm finding these microaggressions, if it's something that needs to be addressed, I just address it. Because I've found that people don't stop a behavior that's unnecessary until you give them a reason to.
Mm-hmm.
So if the person in the grocery store or the person that sent the message hears a no from you and their response is to drop the N-word, it's because they've done that before. Nobody's corrected it.
Yep.
And so if you pull me into that bowl and you just want to spin the circle, but you haven't been corrected, I'm not at a place anymore where I'm just like, let me be the bigger person and walk away. And it's not, I don't engage to create a fight. I engage to end the action.
Mm-hmm.
So it's either you can be in the room and you can do the right thing or you can leave. And I think when you get to that place, you get a little bit more stern in how you handle or don't handle things.
Right.
So it's just saying, I'm just not at a place where I'm cool with that. So I'm telling you, and how you react after this is going to determine how I react after this.
In my experiences, and I love what you said, in my experiences, I feel like I have to justify my actions more to people that look like me versus people that don't share the color skin of mine.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have my first actual girlfriend until high school. And the moment that I dated one white girl, all of a sudden, the same black girls that I had gone to elementary and middle school with are now like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
like he only likes white girls now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, I had just started liking girls, right? And I've known you for I don't know how old you are when you get into high school. I've known you for all these years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you never made an advance. You never said anything, right? I feel like as African-American men, I can only speak on the men perspective, there's so much pride that goes undetected about us sticking together and standing up and being one. But on the flip side of that, we are in constant competition with each other for reasons that I don't understand. While spending time in Atlanta this weekend or this past week, I had never saw so many Black people in one condensed area where there wasn't conflict. I had never saw so many Black people in one area collectively that had so much wealth. And to be completely honest, it was uncomfortable. I have never been raised and put around that type of Black person.
Yeah.
And the only reason why I'm saying that type of Black person, again, I can speak for me, correct me if I'm wrong, there's levels to that.
Yeah.
There's levels to being Black, right? There's tiers.
Yeah.
And I think how the media flips it is it's hard for America to detect the different tiers of Black people. I think what the media does is they'll get a non-threatening Black person that's been put in an uncomfortable situation and then maybe align that with an aggressive type of Black person that doesn't know any different. So when you do something like this, it's hard for people to be like, those are two different types of individuals from two different backgrounds that have done two separate things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I find when I'm moving around, the country or moving around my own city, I have to explain to Black people how to show up, how to speak a language that doesn't come off combative or offensive or whatever that situation may be. For the larger majority of my high school and college life, and I know you could probably understand this, I was taught and learned and told how to speak the language.
Yeah.
So for those who don't necessarily know what the language is, it's how to show up in white America so you're not the aggressor, right? Is that a fair way to put that? So going off of some of the things that you've spoken about and how to diffuse an already heightened situation, certain types of Black people in that tier system, again, there's multiple tiers. If you can identify when a situation is worth heightening and staying there versus diffusing and then you feeling humiliated and feeling like a loser in that circumstance, and you walk away, but you also walk away and go home.
Yeah.
Whereas some people will just stay up here and there's no walking away from that. Now on this podcast, we've had all different types of races, all different types of backgrounds. And I've heard a large spectrum of how people result in certain situations. And I think you're the first one. There may be one more. I think you're one of a few that understands de-escalation in certain circumstances. Now, before you had kids, I knew you. And you've always had this like calm, confident demeanor. Even when you and I would be playing basketball and someone may say something completely outlandish, your demeanor doesn't change. Growing up without a dad is a cop-out in Black America for a lot of actions that we choose to take as individuals.
Yeah.
Would you agree, disagree?
Yeah, I agree with that.
I feel like you being a parent now to two younger girls and also being a husband to a wife, the fight never ends inside of you.
Yeah.
In relationships that I've been in with white women, I've stopped trying to explain my blackness or what it's like for me to be black while moving around in certain cities with them. Because I think I'm trying to be as open as I can. I think me putting them in a situation where I expect them to understand where I'm coming from or what it's like to be me, that is not a good situation for me to put anybody in.
Yeah.
So when you're walking around and you're in a crowded place and you're with your wife and your 2 children, your wife and children could be having the time of their life. But what's going on in your head?
I'm always scanning the room. You know, I'm always trying to figure out who's here, what are they doing, what they see. You know, if I'm walking through a Lowe's, for instance, big warehouse store, and we're going aisle to aisle, and I see the same person 2, 3, 4 times, the antennas go up a little bit. You know, I'm the person that we go into a restaurant, I need to be able to face the door because what they don't see, because to your point, they're just enjoying the show. The protector in me doesn't stop. So ultimately, and maybe this is just dubbed from growing up, it's up to me to protect that. If there's something, somebody comes in with a gun, a knife, whatever, they're going to look at me to be like, okay, what do we do?
Right.
And so I think from that instance, it never stops. So my demeanor is such that I need to be in a calm space in order to see those things. But I also need to be in a space where you can walk through the store and just have fun and not have to see the things that I'm seeing. You know, I walked into a Target the other day and I saw the same person a few times, and I got 2 little girls and they like to just, you know, go around the corner and it may seem like I'm telling you, no, don't stop this, stay this, that, but it's because I've seen this guy with a mask on circling around multiple times, and in the media, everybody's trying to grab kids from anywhere.
Yep.
So to look at it from that perspective, if it were me and one of them got grabbed, my limits are gone. And so I think I'd do it, 1, to protect them, but 2, to protect me, because I don't know what I would do after that.
Yeah.
So I don't think the running and the racing ever stops in any instance, because I'm tasked with guarding the crew.
Hear me out. Because I share some of those same things, but the difference is I don't have kids. I refuse to walk into a restaurant and have my back towards the door. That just doesn't make any sense. If a situation happens comfortably, I'd rather them see me before they see who I'm with. Do you think that our brains are operated with that from past like childhood trauma, or do you think that that's just how we're wired?
I think it's a little of both. You know, I grew up having to watch domestic violence in my home, having the desire to do something but being too small to complete it. And so I think you get to that space where there's always a level like, okay, I couldn't do it then, but I can do it now.
Right.
And that certainly sticks with me. And I would consider that a trauma. I would consider that something I haven't healed from. And again, I think those strings are struck when you're put in a situation that brings that trauma back up, where you're like, you know what? I'm reacting because I remember this thing, and that's where that's coming from. So every time that happens, it's reminding me of this thing. So I think healing through the trauma is one thing, but then being able to identify the trauma in a situation is another. And most people don't. Most people don't want to separate from de-escalation, because in their minds, I need to show you better than I can tell you. So I'm not going to come down until I show you.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell you so I don't have to show you, because I don't know what the limit is. That when you go through all those traumas and they just compound over time, for me, I'm just afraid of the reaction. It's not giving the reaction, but if there's no off switch, like if I don't know when to stop, that's because I'm thinking about all the times that I couldn't do something.
Yep.
And then you did this and I couldn't do something here, and I'm going to add that to you and I couldn't. And so that's the cycle, I think. And we're not very well equipped to handle those traumas in a way that doesn't involve conflict. And when you are able to get put into conflict, you're in conflict for a reason that matters. If you're out at the store with your mom and she's getting in the car and somebody grabs her purse, you might be put in a situation to do conflict. Whereas if, you're pulling into the parking lot and somebody takes your parking spot, I'm going to just find another spot.
Right.
I could, but what's the point? There's a spot right here,
Yep.
So, that to me de-escalates it. And then if it goes beyond that, you get out of the car and this person's doing that, then, it just depends on how you react to it or what the advance is. If we're not in a situation where I need to protect, then I'm not going to. But if it just continues and you're advancing on me and you're just following me through the store, then I'm in a position to protect at that point. And so my reaction to that's going to be different.
Right. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
Different.
Strange.
Offbeat.
Visionary.
Genius.
Amazing.
What makes you different makes you great.
Embrace your punch.
So as a husband and a father in this space, and the only reason why I'm driving this home so hard is I think it's important. I think it's important to realize that before you see color, you see a husband and you see a father first. What's been the toughest part of being a husband of a person that doesn't share the same color skin as you?
I think it's a point that you alluded to is not allowing me to put her in a position where she should understand where I'm coming from. So I've had to get better at identifying with the emotion that relates to the trauma. So if I find myself being a little more aggressive or brash with my daughters about some element of discipline, then I have to relate why. Why is that happening? Could I have said this differently and got the same point across? So I've found myself just being a little bit more transparent in terms of like, here's what happened, here's what it made me feel. Here's what this instance was, here's what it reminded me of. Because I think if you can at least identify with the emotion, regardless of what the background is, then you could at least open the dialect to understand better why that is what it is, versus that wasn't the right way to do it like this, because it's going to be a right way for everybody, and your right and my right may be two different things, but they get the same result. So I think it's really that. And then I think, as I'm approaching a new decade of life, to me, when I got my 20s, I learned something. When I got my 30s, I learned something. Now I'm approaching my 40s. I feel like I'm going to learn something again, but I've always looked at it like in the 20s, you think you know. In the 30s, you start to know. In your 40s, you action things. In the 50s, like that's what it is. And so through this kind of later stage in my 30s, I'm looking at what things have I lost in myself that are important to me in order to not fall into this copycat syndrome again. How can I be me unapologetically, which I think is probably one of the biggest things that I appreciate about you, is that you've never wavered or been different to anybody as it relates to who you are. You're the same person all the time. And so I find myself kind of being envious of that, because me and you are different in that sense, but I don't want to be a different office person and a different home person, another person with my family, another person with my friends. And it's easy to fall into that if you don't recognize that you just let me change with my environment versus let my environment change to me. And I think, to that point, thinking back to some of the things that we've fought through to be in the places that we are now, to be in a room in Atlanta with people that look like you, that are elevated on different tiers, different, financial buckets and wealth management terms. There's a different aspiration. So you might go there and feel uncomfortable, but you feel more comfortable in that instance than you would potentially showing up to Rucker Park, because there's something in there that you aspire to be. Like I played basketball and I've ran track and I've done all these other sports, but I've never been able to sit in this room and see what this could be. And there's people here that are willing to teach me, are willing to share with me, are willing to open doors for me or speak about me in rooms that I don't sit in. And that's a different level of management. And then what that does is it allows you to, waterfall some of that information back to the people that are younger than you in their high school or middle school days, trying to figure out, how do I get out?
Yeah.
And so just by being able to have a platform that shows, here's this other option, here's all these people that started like you, where you are, the same thoughts, same look, same feelings, and they turned it into this. And here's how they did that. And I think that's just extremely important.
So I just have a few other questions before we close out. And I love what you said. So the question is this: how important is it to you to be a father to your two daughters, growing up in a household where your father wasn't present?
I think it's the only thing that's important. I think to me, and this could differ for other people, but to me, if you are in a situation where the father wasn't present for any reason, you either mimic that or you do the complete opposite. And so my desire to be a father came because of my dad. So when I think about the times where I would say to myself, I don't want to be like him, I'm going to be better than him, da-da-da-da-da. I'm who I am now because of him, even though I didn't want to be him. So the fact that I'm trying to find myself in a space where I'm just being present in moments with them is everything. And now my relationship with my dad is such that he can reveal to me, I'm just proud of watching you do something that I was never good at. And I'm proud that you're allowing me to be in your life and in their lives with our history. And I think, that's kind of the maturation of being able to explain I felt abandoned and hurt and sad and blamed and all those things, and being able to express that, and then being able to say, I can't carry that anymore. So I just need you to know I was there, but ultimately I'm doing this because I didn't get it. So I don't know what it looks like. I'm still kind of learning how to be a dad and how to be a father. But I think through those kind of trials of my own trauma, I always go back to, it shaped me having the involvement that I have now.
I find what you do, like you being a parent, you working in the spaces that you work in, you, just some of the stories that you've spoken on. I think if I just use the word inspiring, I don't think that gives enough credit. What you've said today it's inspiring. And I feel like you've hit on so many good topics and so many good headers that is giving me a lot to think about. Being a father just seems so terrifying. And I did a podcast earlier this season highlighting like me, right? And giving people a chance to understand who I am and where I've come from. And having my dad in the capacity that I did, it's almost hard for me to show any other emotion to people that I care about outside of protection. So it's not often that I can sit someone down and tell them that I care about them or that I miss them. It's more often times than not, I show my love, respect, care in form of protection. So seeing you sit across and listening to the extent that you would go, not only to see your two daughters happy and feel safe, but the fact that you're willing to potentially, in some circumstances, cut your life short, have your life remain behind bars in protection of your family. It makes me feel that how I show up in relationships or how I show up for my people, meaning like friends, that it's okay. If you were to look at your life 20 years ago, and then 10 years ago, and then right now, what would be some advice that you would tell yourself, knowing what you know right now at 20, at 30, and then you present today?
Yeah, I think at 20, I would have asked to be surrounded by the right people that could let me know what a career actually meant, and whether that was a career in sports or career in the job market. I think at 30, I would have told myself to slow down a little bit, to make sure that what I thought I saw, what I thought I knew made sense. Because, for us, typically you turn 18, you leave the house, you go to college, you get a credit card, you build debt, and then you're like, now what? So I think just being able to feel okay elevating where I was at 30, not trying to put a stamp on by 20 you should be here, by 30 you should be here, by 40 you should be here, because everybody's journey is different. So just to recognize what the struggles were and to be okay where I was probably the biggest thing. I think giving myself advice today, I would remind myself to try to pay it back or pay it forward, depending on how you're looking at it. And I think you do that. I do that through mentorship, because when I speak to people, I try to identify with the emotion. I don't have to have gone through it, but if you say you're scared or you're nervous or you're worried, I can identify with those emotions because I felt them somewhere. So knowing that that is a real thing, to make sure to identify with where people are, and then share my own experiences that would give them the tools to work through whatever their trauma is. I think even just moving forward, making sure that, again, I'm just enjoying the journey, because there was a time where having $100 in my bank account was like the max, and trying to meal plan to make sure I had enough for the week was a real thing. And so to be able to understand what growth over time looks like is big, and not trying to speed up that process.
Well put. All right, as we close out, I wanted to say thank you guys for tuning in today. This is another episode of Embracing the Journey podcast hosted by Norris Frederick, and we'll see you guys next time.
When you come from very little, you have very little to protect. And so when you have little to protect, you protect it with everything.
Right.
This guy, he is either on drugs or homeless or maybe both. I don't really know. Shoot some words off and he dropped the N-word. In my mind, I heard him say this and I had to just get kind of clarification. Like, is this really, did I hear what I thought I heard? I'm pushing my daughter in the stroller and I'm like, okay. So now I have to think about how am I going to protect the people that I'm with in this situation? And I have to remove limits, because the fact that you're coming across the street tells me you don't have any.